morning. Well, I guess we'll get started here. We have several other sessions left today that follow this one, so we have to make at least an attempt to stay on schedule. The program here this morning is on cultural centers and heritage tourism. My name is Steve Henrikson, and I'll be moderating this morning. And we have a really exciting panel of presenters here to talk about several of the cultural center projects going on in Southeast Alaska, and also on aspects of heritage tourism. Our first presenter this morning is Lani Hotch, and she is involved in the Cultural Center project in Klukwan and has been for quite a few years now. It's been a long-term project to develop a cultural center for the community there and integrate it in with learning opportunities for local people, as well as provide amenities for tourists to the area and develop the economy. And that's characteristic, it seems, of a lot of the cultural center projects, trying to marry educational component for locals with tourist learning opportunities for visitors as well. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to Lani Hotch.
Thank you, Steve, for inviting me to present here today. Santat effectu sa Tlingit kena, chop na khatiti, kagwantan ayafet, gana te yadi, ka yadi ayafet. Dipkat kwan ka puj hit dakaya, gana te dachkan. My Tlingit name is Santat. I'm in the Eagle Wolf House, Eagle Clan Wolf House. The name of my clan is Kagwantan. I'm a child of the Ganapategi. My father was adopted. He's not native. He was not native. He was adopted into the Ganapategi clan. And my parent father was Ganapategi on my mother's side. I'm getting some feedback there. The first slide we have up here is the logo of the Chilkat Indian Village. It's a detail taken from the Klukwan Healing Road. That was a project that we completed, I believe, in 2001. And if you can see at the top of the design, it says Yikoayakwan, which means be strong, have courage. The whole idea of the healing road was to let go of the past hurts. Everybody knows what has happened in the history of Native people and all the negative impacts that our ancestors and our parents and we have had in our lives, and if you carry around that bitterness and that hurt, it just poisons everything that you do. So at some point, you have to learn to let go of those and move forward, and that was what the healing road was all about, to let go of the past hurt, forgive, and receive healing, and move forward. The mission of our camp is to promote wellness and to educate individuals and families in traditional Chilkat values, arts, and subsistence skills. Our philosophy is to know complete wellness, we need to know it in our bodies, in our minds, and our spirits. Okay. Wrong arrow. Okay, Hooligan Camp. One of the things that we focus on in our camp is seasonal subsistence camps, and like, wait a minute, it's moving ahead too fast.
a minute.
What's your tape number?
So, Hooligan Camp is something that happens in the springtime, the beginning of May, maybe the end of April. These kids you see here were fishing on the Chilkoot River. They were dipping for hooligan, and they were just having a blast. The young girls were feeling really empowered by learning how to fish for hooligan. You can see the expression on this girl's face with the turquoise vest. She was just so excited, and they were like, every time they dipped, they'd get a net full of hooligan, and they were competing against each other who was going to be the highliner. And those of us who were chaperoning were cheering them on and clapping and giving hoops the hoorays. So they were just so excited to be doing that. It was cold, but it didn't bother them. We had a little campfire set up, and we were making hot chocolate and roasting marshmallows and frying hooligan and eating them with crackers. It was great. One of the little girls, when she went home that day, she told her mom, "That was the best day of my whole life." She was all like 8 years old. Another thing that we do in Klukwan to tie in with our camps is this community garden project. And it started off with Birch AmeriCorps through Rural Cap. Birch stands for Building Initiatives for Rural Community Health. And I had a job with them 1 year as an AmeriCorps volunteer, and was trying to brainstorm ways to bring wellness to our community. And one of the main concerns in our community was getting people active and getting people to gain better eating habits. And so this community garden just fit right in with that. We get out and we're digging in the soil, and we're planting and raking and pulling weeds, so it gets people moving. And then you have the pride of seeing your vegetables grow and flowers, and it's just a great activity to bring people together and get people outdoors and exercise. Button okay, that was
It's just really slow.
okay. Salmon camp is another thing that happens in the summer months. And in this picture, you can see in the bottom left corner is our traditional smokehouse, hand-hewn smokehouse, and Jim Heaton is coming right after. Maybe we'll tell a little bit about our camp and the buildings that are there. One thing that we do at our salmon camp is we bring teachers in through the Rose Rural Urban Exchange Program, the Alaska Humanities Forum funds, and the teachers donate, or this program donates like $600 per teacher. It's a 5-day camp, and the people in the community and relatives from outside the community, they come in, they learn how to make dry fish, salt, brine, smoked fish, and pressure processing, and just learning how to cut and tin the fire and all that. So it's a good activity. It brings people together, and every participant gets to take home a bunch of smoked fish and dry fish and jarred fish, so they really like it. One thing that we just started this last year was a moose harvest camp. A lot of people don't know, but you can get a cultural education harvest permit through the Department of Fish and Game to harvest the moose for cultural educational purposes. And it was our first attempt last year, and we learned how to butcher a moose and process it, package it up, and for freezing we had a vacuum sealed machine, and we pressure processed it in jars. And the guy that's in the red shirt with the baseball cap was a former butcher, and he helped us to learn how to butcher a moose. That was a fun thing. We got a substantial amount of meat to the seasonal camps that happen in the spring, summer, and fall, in the old days, our ancestors would have busy summers, but they had winters to focus on fine arts, and that's what we do in Klukwan. In the winter, we have people learning how to weave. And, this is the Chilkat Raven's Tail weaving workshop, one of the workshops that we have. Cheryl Samuel comes and teaches, and then we get together on our own to weave, practice what we've been taught. Dolores Churchill, many of you maybe heard her present yesterday about the challenges of collecting spruce roots and cedar bark and stuff. And she's one that comes and teaches in Klukwan too. This is taken in the Klukwan A&S Hall. And we have young people learning how to weave, and older folks too, learning how to weave baskets. And we also went out to gather spruce roots in our area. We don't have cedar trees, so any cedar bark weaving we do, we get it from Dolores. She brings it with her. We have sewing and beading workshops. Right here, some of the ladies are working on the Tree of Life Balm of Gilead button blanket that we made and donated to the Klukwan Health Clinic when it was first opened up. I don't know if you guys know about the healing properties of the cottonwood tree, but Klukwan is surrounded by these huge cottonwood trees. And I mentioned earlier, if you want to be completely well, you need to be well in body, mind, and spirit. And so the cottonwood to us represents not just a physical healing and well-being, but also spiritual. One of the names of Christ is Balm of Gilead, and so this alludes to the spiritual wellness. Balm of Gilead Road. Klukwan has a very strong Christian legacy. Back in the 1930s, a bunch of our folks actually went down to the Chilkat River and were baptized in the river in March. This time of year is pretty cold. Carving is another art that we focus on in Klukwan, and here the guys and gal are working on some house posts that were put into the Longhouse last summer. Jim Heaton will be talking a little bit more about the Longhouse project, but this is a project they did last summer, and we also have classes throughout the winter in carving. Some of the funding sources that we've had to carry out our programs and to construct our camp was the AFN Tlingit and Haida Support for Sobriety Wellness Grant that ended a few years ago, but we've been able to pick up funding sources from other areas to take up the slack that was left by that program closing down. Our village tribe offers higher education, vocational ed scholarships, and we're able to use those scholarships to bring university level classes in. Our instructors, Dolores, Jim Heaton, Cheryl Samuel, other people, including myself, I teach the button blanket, felt advocate class. We get university credit, and the teachers get paid through the university, and the students pay the university through these scholarships. The Klukwan Educational Trust Scholarship is through our Klukwan 8 Village Corporation. The University of Alaska Southeast Outreach Program, if you wanted to set up a program similar to ours, you could work through Sitka's outreach program. The person that I contact usually is Denise Blankenship. I mentioned earlier the Alaska Humanities Forum, the Rose Rural Urban Exchange Program that brings teachers in and they help fund our salmon camp. It's our second year in Klukwan of having an ANA, Administration for Native Americans, SEDS grant. SEDS stands for Social Economic Development Strategies. We landed I think it was $386,000 grant over 2 years to fund a Native artist and Chilkat host training project. And we have 10 to 12 carvers and 8 to 10 weavers, and we have 10 people training as professional hosts. And I'm also mentoring project coordinator to learn the administrative skills. The Southeast Alaska Regional Health Consortium Wise Women Program and Wise Families Grant has come alongside to help fund some of the stuff that we're doing, the carving camps, the gardening. They're going to start helping with our weaving program. So they got a demonstration grant last year, and then this year it was funded for 3 more years. So they're really providing some good support to what Klukwan's doing. And the community just got a Department of Education grant for Klukwan language revitalization. And what we try to do in Klukwan is integrate the language instruction into all the activities. And we have elders who are working with the camps and with the language program. It's a master apprentice program. So it's all kind of an integrated, everything works together in Klukwan. It's pretty cohesive. We've only got 140 people living in Klukwan, so people tend to wear many hats up there. I wanted to get into our plans for the Klukwan Heritage Center, Cultural Heritage Center. For those of you who don't know, Yakutat is the actual Tlingit pronunciation of Chilkat. Yakutat means winter storage for salmon. Klukwan is right on the confluence of 3 rivers, the Chilkat, Klahini, and Surku. And we also have an upwelling of geothermal warm springs in the river that keep the river from freezing over. So because the river doesn't freeze over, we have late runs of salmon, and that brings a lot of eagles. We're in the heart of the Chilkat Bald Eagle Preserve, so we get 3,000 to 4,000 eagles that winter in our valley between November and March. And so we're part of the Heritage Center is going to be a bald eagle observatory, and we actually want to run microphones out to the river to pick up the sounds that the eagles make. And we have a viewing corridor or wall of windows so that people who maybe have trouble to get out to the flats can view the eagles from inside this facility. One of the things that prompted our Heritage Center plan was the whale house collection. I don't know if you guys sat in on the presentation that Jim Bowen made yesterday about tribal courts, but he mentioned the Chilkat Indian Village case, and that happened over the course of 10 years. This collection was removed from Klukwan in, I think, 1982 or something like that, and it took the village 10 years to get the things back. It went from court to court and finally ended up in the Klukwan Tribal Court. And the judge, Jim Bowen, was the tribal court judge, decided in the village's favor, and we were able to get things back. However, they are not on display at this time. They are not protected from humidity or from bugs or any kind of those environment from fire or theft. They're vulnerable at this point, and the village wants to protect them. We don't have the resources at this time. We are looking to build this facility, and we're barking up every tree we can find to get funds. We've been working on getting our village ready to build this culture center, and it's taken a long time to get the infrastructure in place. We've had to beef up our water and sewer, we've had to beef up the electricity, we've had to bring a lot of fill into the site, so it's been kind of a massive effort, and building human resources as well. So it was all prompted back when this first happened, and we, people who did that wanted to protect these, to preserve them ostensibly, so, and we do too. And so we're looking to build this facility. And when it's built, people will be able to access those, and you'll be able to see them. As an artist myself, it's very inspiring to see the great works of art that our ancestors did. Here's a picture of the floor plan. The bigger building is the main center building, and it will house an artist workspace, studio space, a gallery where local artworks will be sold, a collections display area, exhibit room. Steve Henrikson actually helped us come up with the plan for this, and gave some valuable input. At one point, the building off to the right is the what we're calling now the hospitality house. It has kitchen, restroom, shower facilities for people who will be staying in our camps. Steve advised us to keep the food service removed from the museum collections because food brings in bugs that could be harmful to our collections. So that was real valuable input. And we also have space for like a workshop area for when things are first brought into the culture center and they need to be kept isolated, they need to be, displays need to be created for them and all that kind of stuff. So all that is in the plans. There's going to be like a tribal house display area where things can be displayed in a more culturally appropriate setting. So there's a lot of planning that went into this building, and we're real excited about it. The hospitality house is the second phase. The first phase of our project was building the camp, and we have 3 buildings in our camp. The Longhouse, the Adzing shed, and the traditional smokehouse. And if you see on this comprehensive site plan, you see the road that leads down to the camp over here. Where is it? You got it? The Longhouse is down there. Okay, so the culture center is over here, and then there's a road that leads, and it's not a very long road. It's pretty close. It's all in the same general area. And along the riverbank, you can see what looks like little sticks or brush projecting out into the river. That is engineered log jams. Because we're building right on the river, we need to take steps to stabilize the riverbank. And because Klukwan is a largely traditional community, we depend on fish throughout the winter to survive. We don't want to jeopardize our traditional lifestyle to build this culture center. So these engineered log jams are how we plan to stabilize the bank. This plan for the engineered log jams was actually funded by the State of Alaska Fish and Game and the Sustainable Salmon Fund. And it's going to cost a substantial amount of money just to get the engineered log jams in place to stabilize the bank. So that's part of phase 2 as well, to build the hospitality house, to stabilize the bank. And we've got half the funding in place now, and my sister and I just got back from Washington, D.C. We talked to our congressional delegation about our project and asked for their support. We visited the governor's office and let her know what we've been working on. And they seemed pretty satisfied that all our ducks were in a row, and so we're feeling pretty positive at this point that at least phase 2 is going to be happening. And we just hired a grant writer, a professional grant writer, to help us get the rest of the funding. And I'll be working with that woman, her name's Ann Miner, and she helped build the library, the funding for the library in Haynes. That was a great project for that community. So we're really moving forward. And if any of you would like to make a tax-deductible, it's a little commercial, contribution to our camp or culture center, you can send it to the following address. Beverly Quinot is the treasurer for our nonprofit corporation that will be running the culture center once it's built. And they're also managing the activities of the camp at this point. Anybody have any questions? Sure.
Earlier this week, there was a travel tourism conference.
Mhm.
One of the speakers was from the USDA.
Mhm.
There.
The question was, are we familiar with USDA? Keith Perkins is the person that works with us. Yes, we are, and we've actually submitted our project to them again. We will be again in the future.
Yeah.
We know about it.
Yeah.
So yeah, we're going to be barking up that tree. Anybody else have a question? Up there.
So my name is Lund, and I wanted to mention contact because possibly there might be opportunities for some partnership. And Sue Bayflower with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service helped Henrikson and she invited us for the second day. The reason why we have this meeting is Fish and Wildlife Service in the state of Alaska are looking for opportunities to problem solve access to eagle feathers. And your center is going to have an eagle observatory. And
Yes.
have you been in contact with Fish and Wildlife Service? Because I'm thinking soon it might be a good contact, just because they're exploring how can we relieve the situation where we have only one repository in Denver, and we're not able to get eagle feathers out to the tribal people who apply for that quickly enough. So you never know, there may be some opportunity for linkage there.
Oh, thank you.
Could you repeat the question,
We'll get in
please?
touch with her. She was mentioning that there's a woman with the Fish and Game,
Fish and Wildlife Service?
Fish and Wildlife Service, Susan Gateweiler,
State Wildlife.
who is looking to set up a repository for eagle feathers, and she suggested we contact her to make Klukwan a possible place as a repository. And that's a good idea.
Yeah, they're not there yet for the repository in Southeast. I think that's something that the Southeast Tribal Fish and Wildlife Commission is working towards, but Fish and Wildlife Service is in a preliminary phase. I don't think they want to be on record and say that they're supporting the repository in Southeast. But they're beginning, they're beginning the dialogue.
Okay, so they're just beginning the dialogue. They're not in the beginning phase of possibly setting up a repository in Southeast Alaska. Yes.
I am Terry Byfield from down Prince of Wales Island. We had a meeting a couple of weeks ago with the tribal councils on the island and the Forest Service, and one of the highest things that came up that people wanted to do in all the communities was build a museum Cultural Center, Discovery Center, call it what you will, but we formed a little committee just recently to get started, and we haven't had our first meeting yet. And I wondered if you could just talk a little about the very beginning of phase one, the very beginning. How did you get going?
In Klukwan, how this whole thing started was our village leaders met together to do a strategic plan and to address the needs in the village. And one of the highest priorities was the Culture Center, along with wellness for the village, education. One of the concerns was to build a new clinic that was more accessible to our people. Beautification of the village. There's just a lot of things that were brought out at this meeting. It's like everybody was just brainstorming. What can we do to make our community a better place, a more livable place, a healthier place? And we just put them all up on the wall and prioritized it. And it was a great exercise, and we've just been knocking them off one by one. We built our ground floor clinic, so we have an accessible clinic. We built the Culture Center, the camp since then. That was one of our goals. And we've built a Veterans Memorial Park. That was Wednesday night.
I'll just change the screen.
Okay, anybody else have questions? But yeah, that was just one thing that we did, and it was a really helpful thing there's a scripture in the Bible that says that you need to have vision. If you don't have a vision, that your people will perish for lack of that. And so it's really important to think, okay, what do we want? And how do we get there? And what steps do we need to take to get there? So,
Well, we can give you a call and talk as we go on. Maybe you can help us.
sure.
Thanks for this.
Anybody else? Here, turn it over to Jim.
Thanks a lot, Lani. That was a great presentation. Really exciting to hear about the plans there, and it's really one of the more successful cultural center projects that I'm aware of. And even though a lot of communities want to do one, it is a difficult thing to know where to start, pulling together all the different pots of money to put something like that together. But Lani's done a great job in doing that, and thank you very much for sharing that with us. And Jim Heaton is our next speaker. He's also been involved in this project and starting work on a part of that facility that you saw the blueprints for. I think it's really admirable that rather than waiting for the millions and millions of dollars it'll take to build this, they just decided they needed to start building and put together what they had, and actually constructed several substantial buildings that they put into immediate use with the educational programs. And that's what Jim is going to talk to us about this morning, is the construction of a traditional smokehouse and a plank house that will eventually be connected to the visitor center and cultural center. So are you guys up and running?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Well, I'll turn it over to Jim.
How's this? Some people may know that this is an extremely historical moment. I've never touched a computer before in my life. like I say, I couldn't even work at McDonald's now. A few years ago, Lani approached me and wanted to know if I could help them build a smokehouse. And I said, I don't know, I guess we can try. And one of the main goals was to do these projects in as traditional a manner as possible. We didn't want to just buy some lumber and nails and hammers. We wanted to try to do it as much as possible in the traditional way. The smokehouse that you saw a picture of earlier was done, I would say, 99% in the old way. We split the boards out of logs, and they were some really nasty logs, but we did it anyway. I think the only metal we have in the building is a few nails in the roof and some hinges on the door. We sunk the posts in the ground and everything, and we're going to have to rebuild that building at some point because we did it that way. When we moved on to the Longhouse, there were some considerations we had to take into account. Safety being one, since we were looking at a much larger structure, one that people were going to be living in. And we also had to look at preservation of the building. So we did do a few things. We anchored some of the beams on cement pads, and we put an overhang on the roof, which wasn't a traditional thing to do, so that helps protect the foundation of the building. But we did split a lot of the boards out by hand. Some of them were sawn, not because we didn't want to do it that way, but because of the quality of the wood. If any of you were at Dolores's talk yesterday about availability of materials, it all ties into this. There may not be any logs available anymore to do this kind of project the way it used to be done. What we needed was really large, straight-grained, old-growth spruce, and I just don't know if there's any around anymore. What we got was pretty large, second-growth spruce. And so we had to change our plan from doing the boards vertically we wanted to do them horizontally, but we just weren't able to do it, so we did them vertically. And that way we were able to cut between the knots and still slab out a lot of the boards. And that was really the main problem we had, that and the weather. For some reason, the 2 summers we did this project were record summers in Klukwan. It was 100 to 105 degrees, and we were literally dying out there because we didn't have any shade either. Just one day it got really hot and we knocked off early, and the next day I brought a thermometer to work and I said, okay, when it hits 90 degrees, we're going home. Well, at 9 o'clock in the morning, it was 90 degrees. I said, okay, let's see if we can at least make it to noon. That was the biggest problem, plus we did have some interesting bear encounters since we were out away from the village, and they were out there too, but we kind of had to keep a watch on things. But we'll go ahead and get started here. And this is just a little intro thing. We'll go through that quick for you quick readers. This is the finished structure. And another thing we did for preservation concerns was we made that's just not working. The corner posts, we made them a little taller than normal. That way if they do start to rot, we can trim them down and get past that. We also put copper caps on every exposed flat surface, and then where these posts go through the roof, we made copper flashing to fit into there. And it's other than the smoke hole, which is open, we don't get a whole lot of water in there. And you can see the top and the peak, those are mostly all split out boards. And the big beams, we had to have them sawn, and while he was sawing those beams out, we got some slabs for the walls. Just as an example, to going back to the availability of materials in the winter and pond photos of the old whale house, and I should have included one of those in here. There's a picture of some of the guys standing in front of the whale house, and this bottom beam in the front you can tell by judging the size of the beam with the people, that beam alone is about 5 feet tall. And in Evan's account of building the whale house, he states they went out and got a tree. And they also built it in 3 days, according to that count. But then we had 8 guys, and they probably had about 250. But we used 22 logs for this project, and they were donated to us by Sea Alaska. And that's the, notice the ramp in the front was, we have to move that. It's not ADA compliant, so we're going to move it around to the side. These are just some pictures of some of the logs we had. Most of these, in fact, these are all the roof beams and the 4 inside corner posts. And another thing we learned in building this structure, it was a learning process because we have photographs of some of the old houses and we have some drawings, but we don't have anything that you would consider an architectural plan. And plus, none of us were carpenters. But one thing we learned was that the roof and the walls are 2 separate structures, essentially. The roof is sort of supported by the walls, but they are separate. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that these buildings were portable. If you had to move them, you could take them apart and move them. This is Jones, Lonnie's husband, and I splitting a cedar log. We have a lot of pictures of us splitting logs and making the adzes that we had to make for this project. And who knows where those are at. But for one of our house post projects, we had a big cedar log, and we didn't want to saw it, so we split it in half. And I included these pictures just to kind of show the process. And it's pretty interesting. It took us less than 5 minutes to split this log in half. We were pleasantly surprised. When we flopped the other half over, I said to the crew, well, do you guys feel like men now? And this I call the bad hair day picture because of me there. Okay. And this is us lifting the other half off. We literally drove wedges into the other end that kind of went tink, and we just popped it into 2 pieces. And it would have taken us a lot longer than that to rip it with a chainsaw. There's the 2 pieces. A little bit of a twist, but with a chainsaw we would have had to do just as much cleanup on it. These are some pictures of us adzing boards. These boards were actually going on to the smokehouse, much thinner boards. This was not one of the hot days. And the smokehouse, like I said, we split all the boards out, we made the shingles, we did it all. These are some of the logs we had, and they were pretty good size. You can see in the background there a pile of boards starting to grow. And at the end of that first summer, we had 70 boards made, and that was split and adzed to thickness. That was about a third of what we actually needed. And you might imagine this whole process created a lot of good fire starter. Here we are getting ready to load up mount the corner posts, the inside corner posts, or the roof support beams. These are a couple of the side beams. They were about 2.5 feet tall and 2 feet wide. The channel in the middle was 4 inches wide and about 4 inches deep. And you can see the texture on the beam. They were all textured with adzes that we had to make. And actually, this is the beam we call the signature beam. This whole side of this beam was adzed by the village office crew and our crew. We kind of tricked the office crew into coming down to the work site one day, and we put axes in their hand and had them lay down their texture on there. They quit complaining about seeing us doing nothing except sitting around taking breaks after that. I said, oh, these are just some of the beams getting ready to get textured and loaded up and moved down the road. Our work site was in the cultural center site, and so everything had to be moved down the little road. We are putting some of the corner posts in. One of the interesting things about this was we could notch and groove everything, but we couldn't tell if we had it right until we tried to put it into place. So there were some fun times there. Like holding the beam up in the air while we're sitting there trying to knock more off the post and get it into place. That was an exterior corner post. These are the roof supports. And since we only had a few guys on the crew, we had to use the machinery. See here, we're using a PD to try to pivot that log in place, and we learned a really good lesson when we were moving the big beams and trying to put them into place. We tried using a sledgehammer and banging on them, and there was just too much mass for us to move them that way. What we had some red cedar logs about 3 feet long and about 2 foot across that were leftovers from the A&B hall. And so we made a sling for one of those, just a big loop with rope, 2 guys on either side, and we used it as a battering ram. And that just knocked everything into place when we needed it. It had just enough mass and a wide enough footprint that it would move those beams into place. That was we called that getting medieval. Because I tell you, we put a lot of effort into trying to move them with a sledgehammer, and the sledgehammer just bounced right off. Part of the problem was trying to scoot them onto the cement. This we call break time. Lani would bring us down popsicles all the time, and we just inhaled them. Some people just put them in their armpits, trying to cool down. Guess you didn't see that. Here things are starting to take shape. This is, like I said, the roof, we did the roof, traditional roof construction on it, which when we were working on putting into the logs, we basically had to notch each rafter into the roof logs just to get it as flat as we could. And the main ridge beam, we actually had to manufacture that up onto the roof. Found out one thing, a lot of the guys on the crew did not like being up on the roof. Didn't like it. Here's Jones, just sort of having fun. Yeah, Lani got up on the roof a couple times. You'll see behind Jones is one of those cedar pieces we used as a battery. And this is us starting to frame in the floor. Rather than excavating down for the floor, we elevated the floor up to make our levels. And this building is 35 feet wide by 50 feet long, so it's about a half-scale version of the whale house.
Tell them the reason we put we elevated the floor rather than digging down. It's real close to the river, and if we dug down, we would have just had water coming in there. Because we had to bring in probably about 5 feet of fill into that location where this was built to get it out of the water, floodplain.
We call this the door shot. Pretty massive doorway. It's actually larger than you would have seen on a lot of traditional houses, and I think it's about 5 feet tall. And a lot of people complained about it being so short, and we had to explain that it was a lot bigger than it really should be. And we also have a back door on it for fire access, or exit. Here's the interior starting to take shape. We did brick in the fire pit, just so we don't burn the building down. And we do have kind of a standing rule. There's never a fire in there without people being in there. We don't, if we have a fire in there, we put it out. And someone made some comment about, may there always be smoke coming out of your smoke hole in one of the presentations yesterday. Once we got this fire pit bricked in, it was kind of a contest to see who could get down to the work site first in the morning to build a fire in there. We always, had a little fire going, and I think that's what Daniel there is doing, is getting ready to build the fire. Yeah, we had a lot of scrap to burn. That was not a problem. In fact, some of it just came flying off the roof into the fire pit. Just a strange shot, a little air compressor we never actually used for anything. Luckily it could fit out the door. Just putting the 1x6s down on the roof. Still plenty warm, and once we got the tar paper on the roof, it was just brutal. Shingles, they were interesting. We didn't have machinery to get them up there. That was quite the project. That's looking out the back into where the back of the building is. This is how we got the shingles up. We just made a ramp. I think at this point, not a single person on the crew had ever nailed a shingle down. When we were done, everyone said they didn't want to do it again either.
Really good on that. Adzing.
Yeah. The finished view again. This little face in the peak there, that's the Band-Aid. The two front gable boards, we had to raise them up. People lifting from the bottom, people pulling with ropes from the top. We got one up into place, got it pegged into place, hoisted the other one up, and found out that one was about an inch less in width than the other one. And so we kind of thought, there's no way we're doing this again. So that night I went home and I had a piece of yellow cedar, so I just cut an ovoid out and was going to just place it over that where the two boards met. And then my wife said, well, aren't you going to paint it? And I said, no. It was like 9 o'clock at night at that point. I was up till about 1 that morning painting this little face on here. And I got there before anyone else in the morning, got up on the roof and put that in place, and I think it was a day and a half till anyone even noticed it was there. But you can't tell they're a different width now. This is a picture of the 2 house posts we did this summer and the wall screen, which tells the story of the house. These house posts are also carved out of spruce, which was what was traditionally used in the village, since they don't have cedar there. And actually, Lani, would you like to tell the story of the house? Joe Hotch is the one who named the house.
When we finished the Longhouse project, we had a celebration in the community to honor the guys that worked on it, and we asked the elders to help us come up with a name for the Longhouse, and Joe Hotch came up with this name, Kaya Hayi Hit, and he says it means house like a mirror. And he told this great story at the celebration about this clan house long ago that had was full of winter supply of food. It had lots of clan artwork. If you see in the wall screen, you can see the storage boxes, the baskets, and the Chilkat blanket faces. That was Chilkat blankets were a sign of wealth in our community and in our culture. And so this clan house was full of wealth. And for some reason, the people were away. Maybe they were at a fish camp, or maybe they were on a hunt or something. But these people came in on canoes and found this rich storage of food and all the wealth. You can see the coppers in there. And they loaded up their canoes with all this bounty that was found in this clan house. And they were making off with it. But all of a sudden, the stuff disappeared from off the canoes and reappeared back into the clan house miraculously. And Joe Hotch, when he told this story, and he said, and we have relived that story today. Because he said, what was taken from us, all our richness, our cultural richness, has now come back to us. He said, with the young guys relearning these skills, learning how to build, learning how to carve, they're bringing that cultural richness back to us. And so, Kaya Hai House Like Mirror is reflecting the traditions and values of our ancestors. And these faces at the top represent the young men that helped build the Longhouse. And the big face in the center represents the guardian spirit that was watching over the clan house and continues to watch over our community today. The canoes are, the figures on the bottom are canoes represented in the story, and all the storage boxes. Actually, my daughter carved the storage box in the center with the halibut, because we use those boxes to store fish in. The baskets, all that. It's a real source of pride for our community, this Longhouse, and it was a very moving experience when we had that celebration. And you can just see the pride in these young men when they were being honored by the community. They just really stand tall.
This is we'll talk a little bit about the Adzing shed project. This one, we built this so that we would have a place to work in out of the sun, and after we finished the Adzing shed, we haven't had any sun yet, so it's been keeping us dry. And this was, we kind of patterned this on the roof structure of the Longhouse. And we'll just go through these kind of quick. Just some of the carving we did on the posts. This is the crew that was on the project. One of the things we've done in the Longhouse is we've had a carving retreat, and we're hoping to have another one here possibly May, or we haven't set the date yet. And the first one we had was fairly small, only about 5 or 6 people, which was good because we figured out a lot of things we don't want to do next time. Main thing on this, you might see me sitting around a lot. I was on crutches thanks to the Adzing shed. This is at nighttime at the carving retreat. I really like this picture because it shows the fire reflecting off the wall screen. I can go backwards. Guess not. And one of the things we concentrated on at this retreat was bulge-sided bentwood bowls. This is one out of spruce, which bends real nice, by the way. Another thing about inaccessibility of materials, we're learning spruce is a really good wood. It's pretty darn cheap, too. This is just a view from the Longhouse, looking up the river.
But the river's pretty high now.
Yeah. Okay, any questions?
I'd like to know how far the Longhouse is from the community and how did you decide on that location?
Maybe a quarter mile total. I think the main reason it was placed where it was one, they wanted it by the river. And then they also, since this is all part of the whole cultural center complex, they kind of wanted it to be on that side of the village so that the people wouldn't have to go through the village. There wouldn't be busloads of people coming through the village. And it's a really nice spot. It was reclaimed land, actually. It used to be the car dump. There was just, we spent probably a good 2 weeks at the very beginning of the project just pulling stuff out of there and cutting the trees down. And there was things that had been there for probably 40, 50 years that we had to excavate. It was kind of an archaeological dig. But it just works out nicely where it's at. We are kind of on the bear trails, though. We did have to shoot one once, but we're constantly hearing them. One time, when I was up on the roof, someone said, "Oh, there's a bear." And I just kind of looked down and said, "I don't care. I'm fine." But yeah, it's going to be nice. In fact, when we were working on the poles this summer, I came in one morning and one of the tarps was pulled off the eagle pole. And I thought, oh, well, somebody was already here and didn't fold up the tarp, didn't think anything of it until I walked up and saw a big muddy footprint right on the eagle pole. And I thought, oh, this is kind of spooky, and didn't bother the raven pole, didn't even sniff it or anything. And time goes on, when we get them almost done, we come in and kind of standing on the other side in the shed, and I kind of look over and go, I could have swore we smoothed that spot out yesterday. And we go and look at it, and there's another muddy footprint right on the eagle pole. So they never bothered the raven poles. They were checking out to see how good a job we were doing on the eagle pole. Anything else? Yes.
I know there's a lot of strong women in Klukwan, and Lani is one of them. Her sister Kim, the other, Evelyn Hotch. We have a lot of women in Klukwan, and I want to congratulate Klukwan, Haynes area, for their strength in our culture. And while I have your undivided attention, the first night we were here, we were kept awake because our window faced the Pioneer Bar. 2 o'clock in the morning, we're still awake. 3 o'clock in the morning, we're still awake. And I'm talking to my friend Ethel here. They had pictures about the President of the United States. And I said, Ethel, President Tlingit. The Tlingit, I had Tlingits on my mind. And I said, the grand president. I thought I'd cheer you up. Or wake you up.
Anything else? So we'll move right along.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Jim and Lani. That's really great to see all the work that you've done. It's a fantastic project, and I'm sure that that you'll be getting the rest of your funding soon. Our next presenter is involved with a effort to put together a cultural center and museum in Yakutat, and in the process restore a historic building there, the A&B Hall, which is one of the most interesting A&B halls that I've ever been in, and it's got a lot of history to it, and they're hoping to rehab that building, and in the process build a cultural center within it. And I'd like Bert Adams to update us on his plans and talk about whatever else you want to talk about.
I don't have a PowerPoint presentation, but I was really impressed with what's happening over in Haines, and I hope that maybe my presentation today will help, create little images in your mind as to what we are trying to do in Yakutat, with just my words. Give you a little bit of history about the Alaska Native Brotherhood Camp number 13. The camp was organized in 1922, and prior to that, they started planning to build a hall. And right next to the hall, a little ways down on the hill, there was a tribal house where they used to have dances and fundraising activities to start building that hall. And the thing that's so amazing about the hall in Yakutat was that they had to haul the logs from across the bay and then tow them to shore and then haul them up on the bank, and then they would start processing the logs to build the hall. And I don't think that they used any of the log splitting techniques, that you guys used in Ketchikan and Klukwan, but they used broad axes. And if you go to Yakutat, make sure that you make it a point to come and see the hall, because the beams that are across the building are exposed. We've deliberately kept them that way because we wanted people to look up there and see the marks, the broad axe marks in the timber. And that timber is in excellent condition. And the building was all volunteer, and you have some plaques up there. I see we have plaques like that in our hall, and they are a list of all of the people who had worked on the hall. There was the timber fallers, there was the broad axers, there was the carpenters, and then the women, the sisters, also provided the food for the workers. And it was all a united effort to try to get this historic hall in place. I think it was completed, in about 3 years. Took them a while. And that hall now is almost 80 years old. And what we want to do is bring it back up to standard and add some new features to it so that it will service our community for another 80 years or more. The idea is to make, the vision is to take out the bathrooms and the kitchen, which are on each side of the hall toward the front end, and then move them over to the side. We're in the process of getting the properties all around us secured so that we have ownership of it. We managed to purchase one that the Presbyterian Church had their building on. It burned down many years ago. and we purchased that. And then Paul Jackson has a site down below the hall, and he said that if we satisfy him in the way that we were going to put this hall together, he'll turn that over to us. It's a restricted deed. And then we're hoping we can use that for a parking space. And then there's another little corner of the, just a small piece of property that needs to be probated. We're waiting for that to happen. We'll have that secured pretty soon. Once we get that property, taken care of and in our hands, then we'll be able to do what we want to do. A year or so ago, we hired a professional grant writer, Alaska Funding Exchange out of Juneau, to develop a funding strategy for us. And we told this individual, what we envisioned, what we wanted to do, and they put together a funding project that all we needed to do was implement it. It told us exactly, where we needed to go for the funding. Told us exactly what we needed to do in order to become qualified for that funding. One of the big stumbling blocks we're working on right now is for the organization to become tax-exempt 501c3 with the Indian Health Service. That way we'd be able to go after the necessary funding to do what we really want to do. Here's what we want to do. I mentioned, that we're going to take those two partitions out, move them to the side. We also want to jack the hall up maybe a couple feet and excavate down underneath it, and that'll give us room enough to put a full-size basement in there. And part of that is going to be office space. We don't have any office space in the hall, so the officers, we exchange officers quite often. The big issue is the record keeping is kept in people's homes, and sometimes those get lost, and so we need an office that will keep our records for time and all eternity. There's about 1,500 square feet of that basement that is going to be dedicated to a small museum. Alaska and Tlingit Central Council assisted the tribe in repatriating about 30 artifacts from the Dry Bay area, masks and hats and things like that. And right now, Steve Henrikson has been kind enough to allow us to have those artifacts stored in the museum in Juneau. I know, talking with Steve several years ago, he showed me a lot of stuff, artifacts, that were in the museum from Yakutat, and he explained to me, that there's hardly space there, and we appreciate, the fact that he's been able to accommodate us, because we know that they too are hurting for space. Excuse me. This museum will then allow us to bring those artifacts back to Yakutat. As I mentioned, we do have a funding strategy. We started to implement that, last year. In order to go for the funds that we needed to do some emergency repair work, we had to, as a community, raise $26,500 in order to make some matching funds, to do an emergency repair work on the east and the south wall. The east wall has been deteriorating from weather over the past few years, and it's causing rot along that wall. We had an engineer look at the building before we decided we were going to do anything with it. We thought maybe it needed to be surveyed. An engineer came and he surveyed the whole building, and the main thing that we were concerned about was the foundation, and he assured us, in his report, that the foundation was solid. It too has those beams in the floor that were hewn out of logs, and so, the foundation is pretty solid. It's going to be able to withstand, the stress and strains that it's going to require in order to bring the building back to standard. So what we did is we applied for 501c3 status. We're waiting for that to come, to be approved just about any day now. We have a request with the state legislature. Some of the people in the legislature feel that this hall is worth saving. The community also believes that it's worth saving. We had some real long discussions about what we should do with the hall. It has survived several fires. The city and borough and the fire marshal has condemned it several times, and we've done our best to try to keep it, up to standard and usable, and we've been getting by with it, but I don't think we'll be able to do that very much longer, if we prolong the renovation very, very much further. And so, through a resolution 3 or 4 years ago, the membership said that they would like to see us save the hall. There are some people who are saying, tear it down, use the same materials, to rebuild. But the sentiment was that those names who are on the plaque, those plaques in the hall, we need to honor them. We need to save this hall and bring it back up to standard so that it will serve us for many more years to come. So where we're at right now is I have to share this with you. I didn't realize that that one person would make a difference in seeing a vision come to fruition. Last May I got appointed by the Alaska court system to serve as a magistrate for Yakutat and I had to resign my position as A&B president as well as, they let me stay on as a project director for the hall. But that crippled my ability to go on and continue with the fundraising activities and to put the funding strategy into action. Had some good people to work with. We have what is called a heritage committee that is separate from the organization itself. We meet every week and we discuss, how we can, raise more funds, and then once we have made a decision to go out and do it. And these 5 or 6 people are the busiest people in the community. I mean, you look at their jobs, the things that they do, and you wonder how they can put in, an hour each week, strategizing and planning and implementing, projects that we want to do with the hall. And I really take my hat off to those people because, as I said, they have their own jobs, they have their own responsibilities, and they're always overloaded with other work, and so this Heritage Committee is the one that is really making this project work. And so I just wanted to share that with you. And I do rely a lot on them for help and guidance to make sure that we keep this renovation or this restoration focused. Let me see. Having had to resign, my position as the president, I expected someone would step up and carry the ball from there. And, I encouraged the new president to move with it, and it was very difficult, to get them to, they don't have the same vision as the original people who had this project, in mind, and so it just didn't work very well. And so, fortunately, I had to resign my position as a magistrate. Things didn't work out, for me, and so I got back involved with this project again. And it's very difficult to try to get, people motivated again, and that's what I'm trying to do. All we need to do is put the funding strategy into action again, and when I get back home, there's some things that I need to do in order to get back on the straight and narrow path again, and hopefully we'll have some actual visual projects that will take place. First thing that we have to do is repair that east and south walls. So the funding request that we have with the state of Alaska is to do that. And we hope we can do that, after the legislature adjourns and they, announce all of their funding. So they'll probably go through the city and borough's capital budget and then filter on down to us. We'll get those two walls repaired. Once that is done, then we'll be able to, the building will be strong enough so we can jack it up and excavate. We'll be going after more grants. The big funder, we've already, got some nods from the Rasmussen Foundation to receive the funding, to do, the museum and the basement part of it. And so, that's about it. I think it's going to be a big project, but there's a few people in that community that really want to see this happen, and we're going to plunge ahead with it. When we get to the museum part, we're going to involve Steve, who's offered his help and expertise on how we can go about making that happen. We're going to do this through some grant monies, and understand that we might have some funds as well too. So we're going to look forward to that. But we need to sit down, as an organization again, and get this project going. I think what's going to really make a difference is that we just recently got the organization, the Alaska Native Brotherhood organization. I see Ethel Lund up there. I've always gone to A&B conventions, and we didn't make it this year because of the funding that we didn't have to do that. We had a lot of money in the building fund, but we didn't have very much in the general fund, to keep the organization, going. We had to pay light bills, power bills, electric bills, and those are sky high. And so we're struggling, just to try to keep up with those bills, and so we couldn't send any delegation down to the convention this last year. We got ourselves incorporated, and we recently had an election, and the officers of the A&B organization are serving as the board of directors. And so we're able to sit down, on a monthly basis now, and start really getting serious about this renovation project and restoration. So when I get back home, this is what we are going to be doing, is having our second meeting. We've had our first one already to get a little bit better organized, and then start working on the strategy and getting this hall, fixed up so that we can enjoy it for another 80 or 100 years. My grandchildren, their grandchildren will be able to do that. So that's about it. Is there any questions that I can answer at this point? Don't make them hard ones, because I don't answer hard questions.
Bert, who took over as president of A&B?
Pardon?
Who took over your position as A&B president?
Oh, when I left? Tony Johnson, Sr. And, I just got recently elected back in there, so hopefully, this will help us to get back on the street. There's a question up here.
I'm Gail Johansson-Peterson with the Southeast Alaska Indian Cultural Center, and we have some common roots because the Cultural Center here in Sitka began with the Alaska Native Brotherhood and Alaska Native Sisterhood. And if we can be of any help to you, we're happy to stand by you and help in any way that we can.
Chish, after we're done here, I'd like to get your name and address so that we can start that process. Any other questions? Good night, Chief. Thank you. I brought this with me last night when I was sitting up here ready to give my, waiting to give my presentation. My throat started to get really dry and everything. I was wondering if I was going to do it without any water, and I didn't have any water here, so I brought this with me just in case I needed it.
Well, thanks a lot, Bert, for giving us an update on your plans, and it is really inspiring to hear about all the work that's going into developing some new facilities, and it can't happen overnight. It can't. There's so little money available. It really takes a concerted effort to pull together a lot of small pools of money and be able to do something substantial. But even without a lot of money, through hard work, you can still make a lot of progress. Yeah.
I just wanted to add that I've been talking with David Boxley Jr. He's a totem pole carver. We have a couple of young men up here who helped him carve a memorial pole for Yakutat. It was the first one that was done in over 100 years. We had the pole raising last year. What he would like to do is work with us to put 5 corner posts in the hall. Well, actually 4 corner posts. There's 5 clans in Yakutat, and each of those poles are going to represent a clan. So when we get done with this thing, it's going to be a beauty to see. And we'll be ready to hold the AMB convention up there, I'm going to say, maybe in 2008 or 2009. Thank you.
Our next presenter is unfortunately unable to be with us today. Priscilla Schultes with the University of Alaska Southeast Branch in Ketchikan, and the topic of her presentation will remind us that the sorts of thoughts that we're having today about preservation and about building visitor and educational facilities has been around for over a century in Southeast Alaska. And one of the early efforts in that regard is the development of totem pole parks, both as a lure for tourists, but also as a way to preserve and protect that artistic resource that had previously been distributed in all the traditional villages, and many of those villages had been abandoned. So I'd like to turn the program over to Dan Monteith, who's agreed to present Priscilla.
He's on Klukwan. I won't introduce myself, but just say Priscilla was unable to be here because of family obligations. Priscilla is mother of Monique Schulte Atkinson Tahier, technically the name that we heard last night, Esther Shea's name, was passed on to her, and her Monique's father, Eldon Atkinson Tati. As Steve said, this project ties in nicely with the other presentations we've heard this morning, because what Priscilla talks about in this paper is much about the Totem Park and also the cultural center they have there in Ketchikan. So I'll proceed with her title and paper. Totem Pole Parks and Tourism. Totem Bight, located 17 miles north of the city of Ketchikan, is the state park operated as one of the tourist attractions in the Ketchikan area. This park exemplifies the transformation of totem poles from the original meaning as an indigenous art form with deep cultural significance to a tourist attraction of commercial value, primarily to and for non-natives. The alienation of this art form was noted earlier by Aldono Janitis in her article, Totem Poles and the New Indian Deal. Janitis specifically stated specifically, the totem pole projects of the New Deal served ultimately to create the image of an Indian art captured, caged, and controlled by non-Indians in a process which has transformed the meaning of the totem pole from one determined by Indian tradition to one determined by whites. Despite the control exerted by federal agencies, Native elders and artists have achieved some of the goals they set during the process of implementing the totem pole projects. A current effort to market Totem Bight as a tourist attraction involved consulting with cultural teachers and carvers to explain the traditional meaning of each pole and clan house. Interviews with Tlingit and Haida cultural teachers and artists revealed a great deal of confusion about the poles, their meanings, and the purpose of the park as a whole. It is instructive that a supposed representation of Southeast Alaska Native cultures has a very tenuous relationship to these very cultures. Researching the history of Totem Bight State Park revealed some of the fundamental causes for this distance from the local Alaska Native cultures, specifically the Tlingit, Haida, and Tsimshian cultures that it purports to represent. Totem Bight State Park is located in the territory belonging to the Tontiquan, or Tongass Tlingit. The clan house and totem poles were constructed under the direction of the federal government as part of the Civilian Conservation Corps program administered by the USDA Forest Service, 1938 to 1941. The original plan called for the construction of a primitive Indian village. The design of the clan house was completed by Forest Service architects, and the construction was supervised by C.R. Snow, a Forest Service engineer. Although the park and clan house are located in the Tlingit territory, the clan house was designated as a representation of a Haida clan house. The design of the clan house with the entry pole attached to the front is more common to Haida houses. According to Emmons' description of Tlingit poles, the storytelling pole proper stood in front or at the corner of the house, but never in contact with it, and consequently never formed the doorway, as was the custom with the Haida. Adding to the contradictions of building a Haida clan house in Tlingit territory is the use of Tlingit house posts based on Tlingit stories. The park itself is an eclectic mix of Tlingit and Haida storytelling and mortuary poles. 8 of the poles are replications of earlier poles from nearby villages, and 6 were designed by carvers specifically for the park. The process of building the clan house and totem poles illustrates the transformation of the meaning from their original context to a manufactured concept, often referred to as Northwest Coast Indian culture. Ethnographic accounts of a building of a Tlingit clan house was described by Emmons as follows. The building of the house was the most important event of the Tlingit, for aside from the enormous labor of getting out, working down, and fitting the timbers, as we've seen today, with the crudest of implements, I wouldn't agree with Emmons' comment there, the ceremonies attending each step, so exact in procedure, went back to the fundamental principles of their social organization. Emmons describes in details the involvement of the appropriate people and their relationship to the builder of the house. In addition, he adds the named house, totem poles, and graves were all memorials to the ancestors. Once the building of the house was completed, there was a dedication of the house with a potlatch and often the raising of a totem pole. The building of the Haida clan house was similar in expense and importance to that described for the Tlingit. In here, she has included 4 slides showing the construction process of the clan house there at Totem Bight. In contrast to this process, the clan house at Totem Bight was built as a part of a CCC project overseen by non-native architects and engineers. The work was completed as was part of the regulated work week, with no thought of relationship between owners and builders or cultural continuity from one part of the structure to another. The clan house, in fact, does not have a clear clan identity. The house posts were designed by the Tlingit head carver, Charlie Brown, and depict the story of Black Skin. This story is recorded in Swanton's book, Tlingit Myths and Texts. Garfield and Forrest recorded a different version of this story in their book, The Wolf and the Raven. The story centers around a strong man who lived with the sea lions after he ripped the biggest sea lion in half. The story has 2 different endings in the 2 different books, and yet we have a comic book version of this story today, right? The entry pole depicts the wandering raven. Although why it is termed the wandering raven was not clear to those interviewed. Many of the crests on the pole are associated with the Tongass raven moiety. Below the raven are and the mink, and then the frog. The final figure represents Natsi Klene, a story that is well known throughout the area. Charlie Brown, however, was not from the raven moiety, but in fact was Nekhadi. This led to some speculation regarding how he got permission to use the raven stories. This is an important issue since clan ownership of stories was very important to the Tlingit, Haida, and Tsimshian peoples, and crests and stories belonging to another clan were not to be used. Most of the builders of the clan house and the carvers of the poles were employees of the CCC program, not artists. Charlie Brown, the head carver, was a well-respected shipwright with extensive woodworking experience, but little background as a carver. John Wallace, the head carver, was one of the few experienced carvers in the CCC program. John Wallace was born in Klukwan on Prince of Wales Island and started carving as a young boy, earning his first commission at age 12 for a killer whale grave marker. He continued to carve throughout his life and was 83 years of age in 1941 when they worked on the poles for the CCC project in Heidelberg and Totem Bight. The process of carving the poles further illustrates the alienation of this art form from its origin. According to Lee Wallace, the grandson of John Wallace, artists in the old days felt a strong connection to the wood that they carved, and the resulting images were a product of their spiritual connection to their work. He pointed out that the carvers, up until the time of his grandfather, used medicine to enhance their relationship to carving. In addition, a carver had to carve with the right feelings. If a carver was upset or the mood was wrong, the carving would be affected. In fact, many of the carvers preferred the quiet of the evening or night to carve. This relationship to the carving was drastically altered under the CCC program, where there was a set work day and work week. Furthermore, the men working on the carving projects often had little or no previous carving experience. This was a job that had been created due to the efforts of several influential leaders of the Alaska Native Brotherhood. who lobbied for the CCC projects for the Alaskan Natives. Sounds similar to the projects today. From the point of view of management at the Forest Service, the poles that were carved as replicas were supposed to be exact copies of the originals. This posed a problem for artistic carvers such as John Wallace, who felt that it was important that his carving reflect his artistic sense. A series of memos from the Forest Service management indicated their frustration they felt when the carvings were not exact copies. One memo states the tendency for all carvers to be individualist has presented a problem whenever exact duplications of the poles has been concerned. At least 2 letters dated October 3rd, 1941 and October 6th, 1941 concern the unhappiness on the parts of the Forest Service managers and architects regarding the Howkan Eagle pole carved by John Wallace. And Priscilla asked me to read these 2 slides. She kind of has it detailed here in the PowerPoint. It said also that the eagle carved by John Wallace last year carries his own ideas, and we do not regard it as a copy of the Howkan Eagle. The next memo from the Forest Service, and I'm supposed to read this one too. The next totem to be carved should be an exact copy of the Howkan Eagle. If necessary, please take Mr. Wallace down to Howkan to inspect this pole in order to get an exact duplicate. The pole in question is one of the first poles encountered by visitors to Totem Bight State Park and is known as the Eagle Grave Marker or Howkan pole. On the front of the pole, on the front of the eagle is a Chilkat robe design, which was not on the original pole. Lee Wallace explained that his father had said that it was important for him to use his artistic license to express his new vision of this pole. According to Viola Garfield's notes, he used the same design for the Chilkat as he used on his own painted blanket. The bear claws were replaced by formal designs, and there were minor changes. He said the different space make it different. He has insisted over and over that each of the poles or designs present different problems. Hence, the artist handles it differently, which is certainly logical. The mixture of Tlingit and Haida storing poles with a few Tlingit mortuary poles contributes to display in which the original meanings of the poles are lost, and at best confusing and contradictory. Given this situation, it is important to understand why the native carvers and the owners of the pole agreed to allow this type of tourist park. Interviews with elders who remember the carvers and remember the process of implementing the CCC program shed some light on this question. In the late 1800s and early 1900s, many Tlingit people left their villages to move to settlements with schools and missions. Although they left their clan houses and poles, they did not abandon them or give up their ownership to their clan property. However, their departure was interpreted differently by the outsiders, as described by Rakstra in his history of the Forest Service in Alaska. Rakstra describes, and I quote, a vicious looting of the houses and their contents boxes, Chilkat blankets, artifacts, and even graves and coffins. Totem poles, for their part, had been carried off, dismembered, or used for rifle practice. In addition, all expression of native culture, including the arts and carving of poles, have been discouraged by missionaries, teachers, and other government officials. The establishment of the CCC program in Alaska reflected a change in the suppression of native culture. Now, Native culture was encouraged in a new way that was controlled and regulated by the government. This situation presented a difficult decision for many of the Native elders. According to long-standing tradition, the poles were supposed to be left until they fell and returned to nature. However, the wanton destruction of the poles by non-natives, coupled with the need for employment of Native men in the CCC program, presented a new dilemma. Although the decision to remove the poles from their original locations in the villages on the islands throughout southern Southeast Alaska, in order to preserve and replicate them, was a difficult one and involved a break with tradition. Esther Shea, Tongass Tlingit elder, explained that they had many meetings, and before, and I quote here, and before they did this, the elders met together. The opposites were sitting with each other before they were going to move them, because the poles were supposed to be left until they came down. She goes on to say, they did this with their hearts. End of quote. In a later interview with Esther Shea, stated that each clan leader gave a speech. Their primary reason for allowing the poles to be restored or duplicated was to fulfill their duties as uncles to train their nephews. Her words echo an earlier quotation from her uncle Charlie Brown, who was quoted by Riggs just saying, "The story of our father's totem is nearly dead, but now once again is being brought to life. Once more, our old familiar totems will proudly face the world with new war paints. The markers of these totems will not have died in vain. Many of these old poles help bring prosperity to our people." Today, the Haida descendant dance group meets and greets visitors with dance performances in the Haida Clan House during the summer months. They acknowledge that this is Tlingit territory as they share their songs and dances with the visitors to the state park. The grandson of John Wallace, Lee Wallace, is an accomplished carver with poles standing in the city of Ketchikan as well as throughout the country. Israel Shopridge, a nephew of Charlie Brown, has duplicated one of the poles at Totem Bight as well as several in downtown Ketchikan. He also has poles throughout the United States. Nathan Jackson, a world-renowned Tlingit carver, has replicated several of the poles at Totem Bight, as well as others in the Ketchikan area. Nathan Jackson's poles are also found throughout the world. Charlie Brown's goal of rekindling the carving of poles and teaching the nephews has been accomplished despite the changing traditional culture in an effort to preserve it. John Wallace's determination to express his artistic vision still stands at the entrance to Totem Bight State Park. Finish.
And our last speaker of this session is Alexis Bunten. She's been doing a lot of research on cultural tourism worldwide and can help compare what's been going on in Alaska to other parts of the world. I'm afraid I'm going to have to head over to the other building to get ready for my presentation, but after Alexis is done, Bob Sam will start his session on cemeteries in here, and then at noon, theoretically, we'll be serving lunch in this room, and that'll be our last chance to get back together, and we'll have some concluding remarks about the conference.
Morning, everyone.
PowerPoint presentation, and I'll have the pictures, and I'll just talk, but I knew I was going to be here for a week before I gave this presentation, and me and mourning don't get along very well, so I wrote something up. So the title of my talk is Reflections Upon the Worldwide Native-Owned Cultural Tourism Industry. My name is Alexis Bunten. Some people here may know me, some people may not. Just to give you a little background on me, I was born in Seattle and raised between Seattle and Juneau and Hawaii. And my background is what I told the tourists when I work in tourism is good old-fashioned Alaskan mutt. So Aleut and Yupik and Swedish and French Canadian. And I'm a member of Bristol Bay Native Corporation and Pavut Village. And my mom comes from Naknek, but I've always been around Southeast Alaska. Haven't spent too much time in Bristol Bay. So I've worked in what has been coined the heritage industry since roughly around 1999. Some of the places that I have worked include the Peabody Museum, the Alaska Heritage Institute, Alaska Native Heritage Center. So this picture is from the Alaska Native Heritage Center, the Fowler Museum, tribal tours here, and Project Hoop, which is a nationwide Native theater and performing arts initiative. And I've always been interested in tourism and cultural tourism, so I wanted to pursue this business on a more higher kind of think tank level. So it was either going to be getting an MBA in business or in anthropology, and I certainly don't do math or anything business-like. So I went to UCLA, and I just finished this year, and I received funding from the National Science Foundation on a project that I'm starting to work on in Indigenous tourism networking, seeing if we have the same challenges, we share the same successes. So I spent 2 months in January and February in New Zealand looking at Maori tourism. So this talk is going to be a general talk about some of the issues that Indigenous people worldwide face in working and starting businesses, Native-owned businesses in cultural tourism. It's kind of an ideas paper. So my objectives today are to give a generalized historical overview of the Western representation of Native peoples in the tourism context, talk about the emergence of Native-owned and operated tourism, and then talk a little bit about changing trends in this industry and Indigenous ethics in tourism. So I'll start with the background. Can everyone hear me okay? All right. The objectifying display of Native peoples originated in the colonizing period when explorers would bring home physical, quote, specimens, unquote, from newly discovered parts of the world for display in royal courts. In the 19th and 20th century, early anthropologists developed the professional techniques of essentializing Native peoples through world's fairs and international exhibitions, where, quote, the natives, unquote, brought from around the world to the exhibit hall, were instructed to do things like build their own traditional homes, wear traditional clothes, and demonstrate traditional activities like weddings, dances, and shamanistic healing. One author who talks about this, his name is Rydell, he comments, whether one refers to the Seattle Fair, where school children poked Igorot women with straw, or the Omaha Buffalo and St. Louis fairs, where Geronimo sold his autograph for 10 cents. The expositions, and especially the midways, gave millions of Americans first-hand experience with treating non-white from around the world as commodities. In the late 19th century in Sweden, Skansen made these kinds of exhibits permanent by pioneering the open-air folk museum, in which a culture was frozen in time, usually what was considered an authentic time before the damning influence of Western modernity. So Skansen is an open-air museum and zoo located on the island, I'm going to butcher this, Djurgården in Stockholm, Sweden. It was founded in 1891 by Arthur Hazelius to show the way of life in different parts of Sweden throughout history. So now, the name Skansen has been used as a noun to to refer to other open-air museums and collections of historic structures. The extreme outcome of this kind of history of cultural display is what's referred to as Disneylandification, where cultures are transformed into miniature displays of the most stereotypical elements, often in dioramic form. For example, the Small World ride at Disneyland can take the passenger through the entire world. Each culture is centralized and boiled down to the Western iconography associated with it. With an unconscious abandonment of any in-group diversity, Disneylandification does not allow for the people displayed to speak for themselves. Present-day cultural tourism sites are in many ways a legacy of these Western traditions of cultural display. The Mormon-owned Polynesian Cultural Center in Hawaii has been referred to as, quote, a model culture, unquote, by an author named Stanton, that he says selectively attempts to portray the best of those tangible, believable aspects of Polynesian culture with which tourists can identify. Visiting the model culture by strolling through open-air villages representing the major Polynesian cultural groups, tourists can grasp at an iconic aspect of Polynesian society, such as viewing a villager plait a hat from palm fronds or a hula performance. The most outstanding feature of the model culture is its simplicity. The model culture presented at places like the PCC is a simplified simulacra of the real thing. It's inhabited by people who appear to be realistic members of the culture on display, according to tourist expectations. I actually know people who've worked there, and it's kind of funny because has everybody been there? Am I the only one who's been there? Nobody's been to the Polynesian Cultural Center.
Yeah.
Well, okay, so you know what I'm talking about. So they have these villages, so they'll have like a Tongan village and a Samoan village and a Hawaiian village, and it's inhabited by college students who go to the Brigham Young in Hawaii. And so, for example, the Hawaiian students sit at the Hawaiian village, but they actually swap because they get kind of bored with the villages they're supposed to work at. So, usually the model culture is displayed in a synchronic pre-contact era, and these visits are too superficial for hosts to share more complex aspects of their society, kinship, for example, with visitors. The reality of what it's like to be a member of the culture in reference is not shared. Erasing the past is a major tool used to shape the model culture. Unpleasant facts, both historical and present day, particularly those that have to do with assimilation or colonization, are usually erased from the representation altogether. Moreover, differing viewpoints that members of the community may have are erased in favor of a standardized cultural script, and often that script is ghostwritten by anthropologists, not by the people who are representing themselves as members of a tribe or an indigenous nation. The experience of a model culture is one of culture sanitized and neatly packaged so as neither to offend nor overload the visitor with too much cultural information. Cultural tourism developers have looked towards the Polynesian Cultural Center as the cultural tourism site par excellence. In 2000, I worked at the Alaska Native Heritage Center, which is a similarly formatted to the Polynesian Cultural Center, but very, very different than the PCC. The difference being that it's Native owned and operated. The Alaska Native Heritage Center began in the 80s with a call from AFN to make a place that we own and we operate. So that's the difference with it. For one thing, the Alaska Native Heritage Center is controlled by a vast board system representing each Native group in Alaska. So Native leaders, elders, and tradition bearers are all represented on this board. So at a place like this, the Mormon Church isn't going to be the one to decide how Native people represent themselves to outsiders or visitors and guests. The Alaska Native management, while they do train according to things like scripts, also include the individual voices of its workers, trying to some degree to eliminate the problem of erasing aspects of culture when you're presenting it to people. Indigenous tourism professionals are in a tough and paradoxical position. Many wish to present their cultures according to local values and perceptions, but they also know that in order to make a profit from the tourism industry, they must adapt to industry standards. So while there have been a number of attempts in varying locations to develop a truly native or truly indigenous cultural attraction, nearly all successful money-making venues must reference Western paradigms of cultural representation. So what makes a Native-owned and operated tourism operation so unique? In Native-owned tourism, we have control over our own self-representation. Native-owned tourism businesses have a special relationship with the government. So if a tribe runs a tourism operation, they're able to access certain funds that the federal government puts out for tribes to use in cultural preservation and economic development and things like that. Also, tribal people have a responsibility back to their community. And in tourism, usually it's all for profit. So if an individual just opens a tourism business, they don't have that responsibility necessarily back to their community that tribal people do. Also, there's cross-cultural modes of hospitality. So there's the local cultural way to welcome people into your community, or the traditional way to welcome people, and then there's also certain modes that are standard in the tourism industry at large. And so there's a paradox in Native-owned tourism. We must present culture on our own terms, but this isn't a business that dictates the ways that we're supposed to be represented as Native people. So the paradox is that we're trying to represent ourselves according to our own values, but we're participating in a Western economy that has its own ways of representing Native people in the tourism experience. Native tourism professionals, to some degree, must play up to those expectations in order to get clients and vendors to bring tourists in to make money and create those jobs. But we must do it on our own terms. So this cartoon kind of represents some tourists that I've met over the years. And I think tourists are changing now. They're getting a little more sophisticated. Can everyone read that? The lady with the funny hat and the glasses is saying, yeah, my great-great-grandmother was a Cherokee princess, and the guy's got a bubble up above his head, and he's thinking, and he's going, I wonder what's for supper. But people are changing now. It's getting to be a more worldly world. So now tourists are getting more interested in exclusive and boutique experiences. While it does work and it's tried and true, they're getting tired of the same old formula. They want to get to come to know a people in their place. They don't want to meet someone for 10 minutes and learn out all about their culture from 10 minutes. They want to spend the whole day or even a week in a cultural destination. And there's a desire for active participation in the cultural experience. And here's good old tribal tours. I think this is a really great business. So in addition to tours geared for mass market clientele, like just folks off the cruise ships and just regular old people, tribal tours also has the ability to offer great alternative experiences for tourists who want to experience Native culture on a more personal and inclusive level through products such as executive tours and hiking tours. According to the World Tourism Organization, tourism represents the 4th largest economy in the world. It's the #1 economy in many countries. It's the fastest growing industry in terms of job creation and growth. Well-planned tourism may serve as an alternative economic engine in depressed or rural places. And cultural tourism is among the fastest growing sector of the worldwide tourism industry. So cultural tourism is growing. What's in it for Native peoples? There's a lot of benefits to participating in cultural tourism. It creates jobs and diversifies the local economy. It's a way for us to tell our history from our point of view so that we can change the quote official unquote record. Getting folks, both Native and non-Native, excited about promoting and protecting culture. Increased opportunities to record and pass on culture through song, dance, stories, activities, and so forth. Increased sense of pride and identity. Learning about ourselves and building relationships locally and internationally. But although there's a lot of positive benefits to being involved in tourism, there's also danger zones for Native-owned tourism. There's intellectual property issues. So, you know, intellectual properties. There's things that are owned by different people, like in Tlingit country, different clans own different information. So you have to make sure you have the right information. You have to get permission for this intellectual property and all sorts of things I'm sure you're all very familiar with. There's a danger of watering down culture for an outside presentation. There's also a danger in disrespecting cultural values, both on the parts of tourism workers and tourists. So there's certain things that you're just not supposed to talk about to outsiders at all. But occasionally that one person will flub it up and let that stuff out there. That's dangerous. And sometimes tourists can not be so forward-moving. Some of them can be kind of disrespectful sometimes, and that hurts to encounter those people. I also think individually owned businesses in Native-owned cultural tourism can be dangerous. I don't think that this is a problem in Alaska, but in other places I've seen where one individual owns a cultural tourism business and they use their business to represent their entire tribe. And when it's just owned by one person and then there isn't a forum of people or like a tribal council or something on the back end of that, this person can just decide whatever they want to say to represent their whole tribe, and it can get kind of dangerous. And also tribal tourism on non-traditionally tribal lands. So for example, if someone was from, I don't know, Nome or something, and they went over to Fairbanks and decided to start up an Athabascan tour, is that okay if they're Inupiaq? Who knows? And also cultural change as a result of participation in tourism. There's also what I call gray zones for Native people in cultural tourism. One of the gray zones is franchising culture. So I saw a fellow down in New Zealand who started this tourism business in a town that actually isn't where his tribe is from, and people were kind of irritated about that because they wanted to have their own tourism businesses on their own land. They didn't want someone from the next tribe over saying what this tribe was like. But then he was very wildly successful, and he opened another business in the next city over, and the next island over. And people are really irritated and up in arms about this, saying you can't franchise culture. It's not like McDonald's. Another gray zone is cultural tourism can divide communities. Some people are pro-tourism, some people are against it. Protocols of visitorship. I briefly touched on this before. If there's a traditional way of welcoming people into your community, do you use that for tourism? Because a lot of times it doesn't work in tourism, because sometimes things take longer to welcome people in the traditional way. Sometimes there's more expectations on the part of the guests, but the tourists don't know what the expectations are. And also the usage of time, past and present. And what I mean by that is how do we present ourselves as people rooted in the past, but who have a present in the future? Also, discussions of past injustices, bad things that happened in the past. How do we talk about them to visitors without making them feel guilty and bad? But then again, how do we pretend that certain bad things didn't happen in the past? You can't pretend it doesn't exist. So we do have another, in Native tourism, I believe that we have responsibilities and ethics to follow. So stewardship of knowledge. You also, there's a responsibility to check with your elders and make sure it's okay the way you're representing yourself, and not just in the meetings in the beginning. Check up every couple years to make sure you're still representing your community, your culture, your tribe in a way that is culturally appropriate. There's also a responsibility to the next generation. A lot of times the people working in cultural tourism are the youngest members of their community, so you don't want them to just learn about themselves solely through tourism, but through participation in tourism, maybe they can get excited to learn more about themselves. We have a responsibility towards them. There's also responsibility to manage tourism, to manage your space, growth, and sustainability. So, like Lani was talking about in Klukwan with the what was with the plant house. What's the name of it again? With Kaya Hit, how you said that it was set a little bit apart from the village so that people wouldn't trample all over everything. That's kind of a responsibility that we have to our communities to make sure we don't overwhelm people. Also, we have a responsibility to share culture, but not sell ourselves out, and set an example for other peoples. So through dialogue, those factionalized in debates on cultural tourism can, one more thing I actually wanted to read. In the responsibilities and ethics section, I got to work with Don Bremner in '99 and 2000. He's from Yakutat. And he wrote an article, a very provocative article in Native People's Magazine, and I thought it was a neat article because he really expressed this opinion about cultural tourism that I think doesn't get to be said that much because there's a lot of us who are very pro-cultural tourism, and I'm one of them, but I think we need to put all viewpoints out there, and I'm just going to read part of what he wrote in this magazine. So he said, today the majority of what we're seeing being commercialized by individual artists and corporations involved in Western tourism and other areas of Western commerce was and is Klan property, subject to Klan laws. This includes Klan crests, regalia, totems, jewelry, music, songs, dances, designs, food, medicine, knowledge, intellectual property. There's a lot there. And things which the Western world describes as, quote, art forms, unquote. Western education, intellect, commercialization, and business systems has overwhelmed our native societies with the feeling of the need for technology, machinery, food, clothing, shelter, money, position, power, and politics, or not. As a result, there are various levels of our traditional native cultures being diluted, devalued, and lost through commercialization by Western-style companies, and even by natives that use our culture in non-traditional ways and for non-traditional purposes. The native people of Southeast Alaska have always been successful traders among themselves and with newcomers to our traditional lands. They traded and sold non-traditional items and non-Klan property items. It goes without saying, but needs to be said for people in societies that do not understand that all of the Klan property gives each Klan member their identity. We are known by our Klan property, intellectual and cultural property, our customs, traditions, and spiritual lives. So it begs the question, quote, who would sell or dilute their identity, unquote. So that's a very provocative statement, and I think Don says it much better than I ever could. So through dialogue, those factionalized within debates on cultural tourism can begin to come together on a common ground. Rather than viewing native culture as incompatible with participation in the Western economy, cultural integrity should be seen as the key to long-term marketability. In other words, cultural tourism professionals, who are usually a younger generation, should work with their elders and culture bearers to establish a set of guidelines concerning self-representation. Working with cultural consultants within the Native community to standardize protocols of cultural representation is a way to improve Native success within the tourism industry while remaining receptive to local and community interests. By doing this, tourism businesses can market an authentic product that has potential for long-term success without violating local cultural norms and values. As a warning, without working within appropriate cultural guidelines set forth by those who came before us, tribal tourism operations will not have much strength nor credibility among their own peoples. So the cultural tourism venue is what one tourism scholar, his name is Ed Bruner, calls a touristic borderland, or a performative space within which tourists and locals meet. And I just have to say this picture here is of a Maori haka, and this isn't a tourism performance at all. I was on top of this mountain called Mauau, or Mount Manganui, and I was just lucky enough to be there that day that they returned this sacred mountain back to the people of this mountain. So this is a picture of the haka, and everyone was representing. It's a very exciting day. So at this juncture, Native people must decide for themselves what aspects of their cultures they might feel comfortable to share with outsiders by taking advantage of the worldwide tourism industry. In Indian country and in touristic borderlands around the world, locals are aware of the potential for political, financial, and cultural benefits of participation in tourism, but they're also wary of cultural degradation that can result from packaging culture according to outside tastes and consumptive patterns. And with modern technology, I got a picture of from last night up already on my PowerPoint, and I just put this picture up because this beautiful house screen back here has an eagle and a raven on it, and the Tlingit culture is really good about checks and balances. In order to participate in this expanding sector of the economy, Native peoples must develop a competitive product. However, unlike their non-Native counterparts, presenting culture in the tourism setting demands a responsibility back to their Native communities. Therefore, in my opinion, Native participation in cultural tourism requires the establishment of regulating bodies to protect the local culture from distortion as its presentation is tailored to market demands. By negotiating protocols surrounding the presentation of Native culture, tribes participating in the tourism industry can establish a new tradition that responds to the challenges to cultural sovereignty posed by participation in the tourism industry and the rampant commercialization of indigenous cultures in general. These negotiations are mandatory not only to ensure the integrity of the cultural tourism product itself, but because cultural commodification and appropriation is a threat to Native survival. After all, if culture itself is treated as flexible according to market fads, it's no longer culture. It's no longer stewarded by the distinct group of people who share it. Rather, it may belong to any outsider who wants to purchase it and alter it to serve their needs. So I'd like to close by saying thank you so much to all the people who made this conference possible. There's a lot of people to name, so you know who you are.